The envelope on the dinner table looked harmless enough. Just a plain sheet of white against polished wood and candlelight. Yet something about the way it sat there, neat and deliberate, set my heart on edge. My son Darren avoided my eyes when he told me to open it, his voice flat, rehearsed. I unfolded the paper slowly, the words sharp as glass once their meaning sank in rent, $800 per month, utilities included, payment due on the 1st, late fees apply. Across the table, Selena refilled her mother's wine glass. Her tone casual as she explained that Margot had been living there for free because she helped with the children. Darren nodded, as if this was only fair. But I could still taste the bitterness of years spent working double shifts so he never had to take a second job. Of bills I'd quietly covered when he was starting out. Understood, I said, though the word lodged in my throat like a stone. Upstairs in the lavender-scented room they called mine. I stared at the invoice again. Just paper, but heavier than steel. A boundary line I hadn't chosen, but one I could decide how to cross. From then on, my days blurred into an exhausting cycle, rising before sunrise for my shift at the insurance office, clocking out at 4 p.m, then rushing downtown to serve tables until close. My feet ached so badly that some nights I slept with ice packs strapped to my arches. Meanwhile, Margot drifted through days of brunches and shopping. Parcels with glossy logos arriving at the door almost daily. Her laughter floated through the house with her friends over champagne, while I dragged myself upstairs after midnight, counting the coins in my wallet to make rent. Then came the moment that hardened everything inside me. Checking my bank account one evening, I saw charges I didn't recognize: salon treatments, boutique orders, expensive decor. My debit card sat untouched in my wallet, which meant only one thing. At dinner, I raised it carefully, saying these were my funds. Selena didn't even pause as she cut pie. "That's probably Mom," she said, nodding toward Margot. Darren frowned at me like I was being selfish. "You're family. Family helps each other out. Let's not keep score." His words cut deeper than the invoice ever had. Upstairs, I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. Every expense, every grocery run, every one of Margot's indulgences that had slid quietly onto my account, I logged them all. Proof of what I'd known all along: this wasn't about family. It was about how much they could take without asking. It was Victor Hale, an old acquaintance from the bank, who handed me the truth. We met over coffee one afternoon. His eyes troubled. Darren and Selena were months behind on their mortgage, foreclosure looming. My rent, the invoice that had humiliated me, was their lifeline. The realization hollowed me. This wasn't responsibility, as Darren had claimed. It was survival. And I was the safety net they'd cast without asking if I wanted to hold the weight. That night, I began my escape plan. I opened a high-yield savings account under a new P.O. box, carefully diverting spare funds away from the household. Victor connected me with Elaine Bishop, a sharp retired realtor, who advised setting up an LLC to shield my name. We called it Vanquish Holdings, a title that tasted like resolve on my tongue. Every extra shift, every tired tip at the bistro, every small sum scraped from my paycheck went straight into that account. Late at night, I scrolled through coastal listings, my heart steadying as I imagined sunlight through tall windows, wide porches facing the sea. I wasn't ready to buy, but I was ready to dream. Meanwhile, Margot grew bolder. Her voice carried through the neighborhood, hinting that I was a dependent guest Darren generously supported. inside. She told friends on the phone that I wasn't really independent anymore. Each word was another barb, but I let them lodge quietly, knowing she had no idea I was already moving pieces into place, piece by piece. I removed myself from that house. Boxes of books slipped into my car trunk and vanished into storage. A suitcase of out-of-season clothes disappeared next. Even my cedar chest of art supplies was excused under the pretense of refinishing. No one noticed. Darren was lost in late-night phone calls. Selena clung to her projects with Margot by her side. I kept smiling politely while inside I was charting my own escape. By the time I chose a Tuesday morning to leave, everything had been timed to the minute. They were all occupied, and the house was quiet. My final belongings fit neatly into my car, the laptop, the framed photos, the cedar chest. On the kitchen table, I placed a single folded sheet of paper as of today. I have moved out. Rent is no longer due. Services in my name will be disconnected within 24 hours. My key glinted in the light. Then I closed the door softly behind me, breathing air that suddenly felt lighter, freer, as if the walls could no longer press against my ribs. The apartment Elaine arranged was temporary, but it was mine. When the call came days later, Elaine's voice telling me the villa had been secured in cash, I sat on the bed stunned. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tethered to anyone else's demands. It belonged entirely to me. But freedom rarely comes without a price, and Darren soon arrived at my door, clutching another white envelope in his hand. Darren's knock rattled the apartment door, sharp and insistent. Through the peephole, I saw him standing in his pressed shirt and tie, jaw clenched, a white envelope in his hand. It reminded me of that first night when he had slid the rent invoice across the dinner table. Only this time, there was no chandelier, no family meal, just the echo of his desperation in the hallway. I opened the door halfway, bracing myself. He held up the envelope without ceremony. "We got a letter," he said. "The mortgage on our house has been transferred to Vanquish Holdings. That's your company. Isn't it?" His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. I met his gaze without answering, watching the boy I once carried through sleepless nights now reduced to bargaining for walls he no longer owned. "If this is some kind of punishment," he began, but I cut him off. "It's not a punishment. It's business." He shifted, lowering his voice. "We're in a tough spot. Margot isn't well. Selena's projects aren't bringing money yet. We just need a little time. Maybe Mom could stay with you until we recover." He hesitated before finishing, almost pleading. I let the silence stretch until it weighed heavy between us. Finally, I said, "The villa has a guest suite. $1,800 a month. Late fees apply." His face cracked open, disbelief flooding his expression. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Dead serious," I replied, my voice firm. "You taught me the going rate for living under someone's roof." He took a step back, his grip tightening on the envelope, like it might anchor him against the unraveling of everything he thought he controlled. "This isn't a game. Mom, we're your family." I tilted my head. The quiet fury of years pressed into my words. "So was I, Darren, when you handed me an invoice." His lips parted, but no more words came. He turned sharply and walked down the hall, his footsteps fading. I leaned against the door after it closed, not with triumph, but with a quiet certainty. I had drawn my line. And for once, I wasn't going to move it for anyone. It wasn't long before they came together. United not by love, but by necessity. Darren in a blazer, Selena with her arms folded, Margot trailing behind in silk and oversized sunglasses, like a woman arriving at a gala rather than a reckoning. I let them in without a word, guiding them to the small dining table where a manila envelope lay waiting. The same kind of envelope that had once humiliated me now held every detail of their silent thefts. I slid it across. Selena opened it, her polished nails pulling apart the stack of papers. Rent payments, utility contributions, grocery receipts, credit card charges tied to Margot's name. The silence between us was sharp enough to hear every breath. Darren's voice was flat when he finally spoke. These go back over 2 years. I nodded. Every payment I made, every late fee you charged, every expense that wasn't mine but drained from my account. Margot sniffed, eyes darting away, refusing to meet mine. Selena flipped through the pages until she reached the deed, her hand faltering. "What is this?" she whispered. Darren's jaw tightened. "It's the deed to our house." His words trembled, not quite a question. I met his stare. Vanquish Holdings owns it now. He swallowed, disbelief etched in every line of his face. "This is real. It's legal." I answered. "And it's permanent." "You've betrayed us," Darren said, his voice clipped. "Cold." I leaned back, steady. "No, I learned from you. You gave me a lesson in terms, deadlines, and consequences. I just applied them." Silence stretched, heavy and absolute. Selena set the papers down, lips pressed into a thin line. Darren stared at the deed like he could will it to vanish. "Finally," I added, "if you want to discuss the mortgage, you can use the LLC's email address listed in the letter you received. That's how business is handled now." I rose from my chair, holding the door open. They filed out one by one, Margot's perfume lingering in the hallway long after the latch clicked shut. Back at the table, I gathered the papers into a neat stack, slid them back into the envelope, and set it on the counter. From there, I could see it as I packed for my move to the villa. The villa smelled of fresh paint and sea air when I arrived. Light streamed through east-facing windows like warm silk, wrapping me in a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. I carried in the cedar chest, the one that had followed me quietly through every upheaval, and placed it gently in the new studio space. Opening it felt like opening a time capsule of my self-paints, brushes, stretched canvases I had packed away when life had demanded survival instead of creation. My fingers trembled as I laid them out, like reclaiming a piece of myself that had never truly died. My phone buzzed on the counter, Darren's name flashing across the screen, followed by a stream of desperate messages. The mortgage was due. They couldn't keep up. "Help us. Mom." I opened my laptop instead, drafting a reply on Vanquish Holdings letterhead. "Payment due in full. Grace period 5 days. Late fees apply." I sent it with a click, then blocked his number. The silence that followed wasn't lonely, it was mine. I dipped a brush into deep blue oil, dragged the first stroke across a blank canvas, and watched the color catch the light. Hours slipped by as I painted, the sun shifting until shadows stretched across the villa floor. For the first time in years, I was building something for myself, unfinished, but entirely mine. Weeks passed in the villa, and with each day, the distance between me and that house full of unspoken debts grew wider. The ocean air seeped into every corner, softening the edges of my exhaustion. My bank account balanced steady now, the deposits predictable, the expenses few. I no longer needed to check my budget daily, no longer lived under the weight of wondering how much they would take next. Across the room, my first painting leaned against the wall, sweeping blues and muted golds, imperfect, yet alive with something that belonged only to me. I hung it opposite the front door, so it would be the first thing I saw whenever I walked in, a reminder of what I had reclaimed. But freedom does not quiet every voice. Margot reached out at last, her message clipped, stripped of her usual pretense. Darren's hours had been cut. Selena's projects brought in nothing. They couldn't keep up with the payments. Please reconsider, she wrote. I read it once, then calmly opened the LLC's account on my laptop. A few clicks revealed the overdue balance. I generated the standard late notice, stamped it with the familiar terms, and filed it away. No anger, no hesitation, only the same businesslike tone they had once used with me. The villa was quiet, except for the faint hiss of waves through the balcony doors. The sound of a world that asked nothing from me except to live in it fully. Their next visit was more desperate. Darren's face was drawn. Selena's arms crossed tighter than ever, and Margot's silk scarf couldn't disguise the strain around her mouth. They didn't come with accusations this time, but with appeals. They spoke of family, of hardship, of how much they had already given. But I had learned to listen past the words. Beneath every plea was the same assumption that I would bend, as I always had, and carry the weight they could not. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. Instead, I reminded them quietly that the deed was no longer theirs. That terms were terms, deadlines were deadlines, and consequences were consequences. They left again in silence, the air heavy with the truth they could not escape. And for the first time, I did not feel guilty watching their retreat. I thought back to the lavender-scented room in their house, to the quiet humiliation of that first invoice, to the long nights serving strangers with aching feet so Darren could pretend generosity at the dinner table. I had carried that weight for too long. Now the burden was where it belonged. The villa became more than a home. It became proof. Each morning, light poured across the floor, pulling me to the easel. I painted until the sun shifted, filling canvases with oceans, skies, and the horizons I had once only glimpsed through tired eyes on the way to another shift. My hands moved as though remembering something they had always known. In the afternoons, I walked along the coast, feeling the tide roll in and out, steady as breath. At night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of water, watching the horizon fade into dark, knowing the silence was mine alone. One evening, I sorted through old boxes from storage inside the cedar chest. I found the quilt my mother had sewn, its threads faded but still strong. I draped it across the bed in the guest suite. Not for Darren, not for Selena, not for Margot, but for myself. A reminder of where I came from, and of the women before me who had endured, who had built something from very little. The weight of it grounded me, a softness that felt like armor. They wrote again? Of course. The tone of their messages shifted like the tide, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes full of false promises to repay. But I had already chosen. Every letter they received from Vanquish Holdings carried the same terms. No more, no less. I never raised my voice, never wavered. They had taught me what it meant to turn family into business. All I had done was return the lesson, and still, part of me grieved, not for what I had lost, but for what I had believed in for so long. I had wanted to think that blood would be thicker than contracts, that shared history would mean more than money. But the truth was written in every invoice, every charge that had appeared on my account, every dismissive smile from across the dinner table. Family, as they defined it, was not about love. It was about leverage. In the quiet of the villa, I began to rewrite that definition for myself. Family was not the ones who drained you without asking. Family was the ones who respected your boundaries, even if that meant standing alone. And perhaps, I realized, standing alone was not loneliness at all, but freedom. One morning, as the sun rose and lit the villa in shades of gold, I dipped my brush into paint and knew I had reached the end of something. Not just the end of their hold on me, but the end of believing I had to earn my place in someone else's home. I had found my own, not by their grace, but by my own resolve. The weeks stretched into months, and life at the villa found its rhythm. I woke early, not to rush into an office or tie on an apron, but because the morning light was too beautiful to waste. By 7 the sun painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold, and I stood on the balcony with a cup of tea, breathing in the salt air. There was no clatter of dishes from a kitchen filled with resentment, no sharp-edged conversations disguised as family dinners, only quiet, steady peace. It wasn't that I forgot them. Darren's voice still echoed sometimes, the memory of his face tight with disbelief when I told him rent would be $1,800 if Margot ever wanted to live under my roof. I remembered Selena's polished calm as she sliced pie while dismissing my concerns about my drained bank account. And I could still see Margot's satisfied smile across the table that night, as if she had won something permanent. Those memories did not fade, but they dulled. They became reminders, not wounds. The messages continued at first. Darren tried to soften, promising that they would catch up, that things would be different if I just gave them time. Selena sent shorter notes, curt and businesslike, pretending the situation was less dire than it was. Margot's words shifted from veiled barbs to clipped requests, all stripped of warmth. I responded only through the LLC's address, every note signed with Vanquish Holdings. Nothing personal, nothing emotional, just business. And slowly, even those messages came less often, replaced instead with the silence of people who realized that the well had finally gone dry. My life filled with color again. The canvases that lined the villa walls grew bolder, each stroke more confident than the last. I painted seascapes that captured the shifting moods of the coast, abstracts that let me pour out years of exhaustion, portraits of imagined faces that seemed to whisper back the strength I had found. Visitors sometimes came alone, dropping by with sharp-eyed approval of my progress. Victor sharing quiet updates about the state of Darren's mortgage. They never stayed long, respecting the sanctuary I had built. One afternoon, Victor leaned against the balcony railing and said gently, "You know, Camilla, they still think you'll come back. That one day, you'll decide blood is thicker than contracts." I met his gaze steadily. "Let them think it," I replied. "I know better now." He nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes, and changed the subject. "Still, There were moments when grief slipped in. Not grief for the house I had left or the money I had lost, but for the years I had spent believing that sacrifice would be repaid with gratitude. It was difficult to accept that the people I had poured myself into saw me only as a resource to exploit. But grief, like paint on canvas, could be reshaped. I poured it into my work, into the villa itself, until the walls echoed not with bitterness, but with creation. One evening, as I closed up the studio, I thought back to that first envelope, its block letters stark against the white page. Rent due, utilities included, late fees apply. That was the moment they had drawn their line. Believing I would never cross it, they had underestimated me. It turned out I could build walls of my own walls not meant to trap, but to protect. Months later, word reached me that foreclosure on Darren's house had finally gone through. Vanquish Holdings retained the deed, of course, but they had long since failed to meet the terms. I imagined them packing boxes in silence, Margot's designer bags stacked uselessly by the door. Selena's projects abandoned. Darren's jaw clenched as he signed the last of the papers. For a flicker of a moment, I almost pitied them. But then I remembered the ice packs on my feet after double shifts, the taste of humiliation as they told neighbors I wasn't independent, the silence at the dinner table as I choked down dignity with every bite. And I knew pity was not mine to give. I walked through my villa that evening, touching the frames of my finished paintings, breathing in the scent of sea air through open windows. The quilt my mother had sewn lay across my bed, steady and familiar. For the first time in decades, I felt not just free, but rooted. This was my place, my home. Standing on the balcony, I watched the tide pull against the shore, relentless and sure. The lesson was as clear as the horizon. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect. Love without respect is just dependency dressed up as obligation. I had given them years of sacrifice, and in return, they had handed me an invoice. But from that betrayal, I had learned the value of boundaries, the strength of independence, and the power of saying no. And as the waves whispered against the shore, I knew with certainty I had finally come home. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, and let's keep the conversation going.